Good evening.
Good evening, everyone, or good day, depending on where you are.
Good morning.
We're
Right.
we're so happy to see some new faces and some old friends, and one of the things that we would love these talks to do is to be a place of kind of forum where if there are questions that you have that are more than just short answers, you could send them to us and we could try to answer them or at least explore them together with you. And the foundation for tonight's talk or today's talk is from a question that a longtime student of ours gave to us, which is a really complicated question in some ways, and we thought it needed a bit more time than a very quick 2-minute Instagram response. And the question was that, we all know that yoga makes us sensitive, and many of us have experienced that in various different ways. And he said, that's something that we all experience. And at the same time, over the last couple of years, for himself and for many others, we've noticed the sort of augmentation of suffering that is going on in the world. So, and it's quite apparent that there's just this sort of onslaught of unending suffering. And so the question is that as a yoga teacher or as a yoga practitioner, but especially as a teacher, what is our responsibility to students in a world that has so much suffering going on? And as the teacher, we know, well, when you practice yoga, you get more sensitive. So we teach them yoga, we teach them to become more sensitive, and then we turn them out into the world. And there's all this suffering. And so is it that we are doing them a disservice? Or the same actual question for ourselves as students. We practice yoga and we become more sensitive, and then we look outside and we engage in the world, and there is so much more suffering, and we're more sensitive to it. And so what is this conundrum? And as a teacher, what is our responsibility to those people we share this with?
Right. So does yoga increase your suffering?
Yeah, which it does often.
Yeah, it has. Yeah.
It has increased suffering from time to time. Yeah. And, all of us have been in a class and have seen a situation probably where, the class is rolling along just fine, and then someone in the class just starts sobbing. And it seems out of the blue. And this is one of the demonstrations, I think, of how these practices open us up, and they allow us to become more sensitive, and then kind of out of the blue sometimes. Maybe it was a bad class when they were weeping, but more often it's something internal that has come up from them. And so the question is, as a practitioner, as a teacher and practitioner, what is the process of sensitivity, of increasing the sensitivity? How does that happen? And it begins, I guess, usually physically, that we become more attentive to the moment. So we're training the mind to be more aware. And the first thing usually that we notice is the physical realm and the sensitivity of movement and breath in the practice.
Yeah, just sensations through the body and the breath.
Yeah.
And sometimes that might remind us of something.
Yeah.
Or
And when we first start practicing, I guess the opportunity is to really look, to notice when we are noticing. And so that if you're doing something that you might have done many times in a yoga practice, and as you become more sensitive, you suddenly say, God, I've been doing this forever and my hip always hurts. What's up with that? And then it happens that sensitivity goes into the realm of the emotions. It goes into the realm of the mind, so that you become more sensitive to the way you interact with others and the way you interact with yourself and the way you interact with the world. And that starts to spill off of the mat kind of in a spontaneous way, so that you find that you're more sensitive to the way you interface with others, the way you interface with your family, and you may start to have more self-awareness, and you may not.
So you might find that you're angry on the mat, or having imaginary conversations where you're angry at things, and then take it off the mat. And what a service to everyone else.
Yeah.
Or it could be that you become all excited about how good yoga makes you feel, and you take that off the mat. Or fear.
Yeah.
And you take that.
And often with the mental realm, where you start really engaging a little bit with what is the world about? You start to be a little bit more sensitive to the capacity to interface with others. And that's the point in the practice sometimes when ahimsa, or kindness, starts to arise, non-harming. Sometimes that's when people become vegetarian or non-vegetarian, or whatever it is. If non-vegetarian, if they're hurting themselves with their, overly restricted diet. Vegetarian, if they realize they're just sort of overdoing things in other ways. And so it's, as students, it's kind of this thing that happens that we don't, when you walk in the door of the yoga studio the first time, that's not what you signed up for. You signed up to just kind of meet people and have a good time. And there you are, weeping on the yoga mat. And we wanted to explore just a little bit of why that happens sometimes, that people within a yoga class, and it can also happen outside of the yoga practice, but in a physical movement with the breath and the movement, sometimes it's that old patterns or samskaras start to get activated.
Yeah, and because you're moving in these special ways that you would, outside of a yoga class, you probably wouldn't do, you're activating samskaras, which are just patterns through the whole body that correspond to different stories that the mind makes, stories about yourself or stories about the world. And so you can activate them, whereas in just normally doing your everyday things, you would never, assume that position or activate those sensation patterns in the body. So it's almost like you're looking for trouble sometimes.
And the way you describe samskaras as the layering and I love that, where we talk about, that you're putting together things that actually are not things that are connected, that have an immediate...
Because, we identify, oftentimes it's easiest to feel it with people. When you think of someone and you locate them in your body, oftentimes in your heart, of course, but occasionally,
in
your neck or other places. And it really is true, and it can also be stories or situations. And so we really connect the sensation patterns all through the body. It can be in the crown of your head or the soles of your feet, your knees, your hips, your belly, your heart, your throat, your third eye, all of these things. And so when we are practicing, the practice makes you pay particular attention to areas that you would not ordinarily pay attention to. And it activates these associations with usually other people, although it could be whole situations or whole belief systems.
And so samskaras, I guess, really are things that on some level can be very beneficial. They're sort of habitual patterns that help us, like blinders to get through difficult situations. But then they become almost living within our nervous system and our fascia.
So there's some samskaras. There's some samskaras that keep you alive, that might have to do with the particular species of the body that you're currently living in, that lets you respond instantly to the type of environment you live in, like traffic, or if you're living in the forest or the jungle, the certain samskaras that are very important. So they're inherently not a problem, but what we want to do is observe carefully what comes up, so that the thought stories and the associations that we activate when we start to activate a samskara, we continue to pay attention rather than just floating off in the story. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes it's a story about you, or something fascinating like that, and it's kind of boring, or it makes you angry, or it makes you fearful, or it makes you lusty, or something.
You as separate.
Yeah, and the whole practice of yoga is to gradually allow the balancing of movements around the body to activate samskaras. And so you then start to feel these almost, and you're able to feel mindfully, almost in sometimes a refreshed way, this whole pattern of sensation that you maybe haven't felt in years or in lifetimes.
Yeah. And we once, Richard and I once went to a teaching with Thich Nhat Hanh. And in that teaching, he had this just amazing way of talking about samskaras. Because, the idea of samskaras, and coming from him, having had the suffering that he had experienced and he had seen his people experience in his lifetime, he explained samskaras as that you have positive samskaras, and they're the samskaras that help you to kind of navigate and to get through, and that have a function that keeps you grounded and in this sort of engaging in this realm of this world, so that in a way practicing yoga can become a positive samskara, a habitual pattern that you do. Mm-hmm. And then he also said that you then have negative samskaras, like the ones that we've been talking about, that are sort of blocked areas of you, or that are ways that you engage that are not compassionate or not mindful. Mm-hmm. And then he said, the majority of habitual patterns and the samskaras are
kind of
neutral.
Neutral, yeah.
You
just see them.
They're just things that happen. And he the thing that I loved about that teaching, I don't know if you remember this, was that he said, that part of what we do with these mindfulness practices is to endeavor to increase the positive samskaras and allow the negative samskaras to sort of subside. And he said one way that you can do that, and I loved listening to him say it, and he said is that, you have a negative samskara, like a toothache is what he said, but he said like a toothache. And so you have this toothache, and that would be what he would call, a very superficial and sort of surface level negative samskara that's forming. And if you think about it, if you have a toothache, it creates patterns in your fascia and in your body, like we're talking about. And then he said, and then you have the positive, and then you have this slew of of neutral.
Neutral.
And so he said, in that example, the neutral example of a samskara would be a non-toothache. So you have the toothache and the non-toothache. So if you focus your mind and your awareness on the non-toothache rather than the toothache, the non-toothache transforms into kind of a positive samskara. The meaning of the feeling of positive, integrated sense of embodiment that is associated with a positive way of being in the world. So he was saying you have this huge number of neutral samskaras, and if you focus on them, then many of them can be moved into upgraded
Yeah.
to the positive, which really is another way of just talking about, how we focus the attention, which is what the yoga does, right? Is it teaches us.
Yeah. And yoga can also increase negative samskaras too.
Oh, yeah.
And,
Oh, yeah.
and I'm sure we all have incidents where, you kind of twist the teachings a little bit, and you think, oh, well, this, I feel bad, and this proves that the world is bad, and or the class, it awakens like an old injury or something, and you start obsessing on it, and then you go Freudian on it, where you have to relive all of the negative feelings for a number of lifetimes, and we know, that happens.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the different schools of yoga, as they have evolved, are not necessarily very wonderful. In other words, they focus the mind through, a type of understanding of how the religious mind works, but then due to the influence of perhaps, a craving on the part of the teacher to dominate, to have billions and billions of followers, or to rule the entire, all of these normal things that any cult leader would want to cultivate, you can actually really start to damage the students by, playing on their samskaras.
Yeah. Which is not something you should do, obviously.
Yeah.
But, both as the teacher and as the student, as you become more aware of these patterns, and really that's the awareness that is what we're talking about as sensitivity. As you become more aware of it, and because you begin with your sensitivity, your awareness of the body being where that sensitivity and that awareness really first appears for many of us, is, oh, here I am in this body, here's my foot on the floor, etc. That when these sort of dysregulated states arise, or when the samskaric irregularities arise, there is this increased capacity to come back consciously into the physical sensation and the of being in the body, with the body connected to earth, and with a heightened awareness of how that connection is manifesting. And in that way, that keeps you grounded enough that what then starts to happen is, because you are more sensitive, you start to really be able to look a little more closely at the nature of things, than your own nature and the nature of others, and eventually the nature of reality, which is what happens spontaneously in yoga sometimes, but with practice and with some, earnest attention, it can happen in a.
You can have more spontaneous events rather than I am going to create a state of samadhi, but then I have a picture of what that looks like, and so for some reason I'm unable to do it because nothing I do looks like the picture I've created in my mind. And so the mindfulness, which, the word smriti or sati in Pali, is where you can stay with the sensation and breath pattern, just paying close attention to it without grasping at or pushing away the story. So if you push away the story that it invoked, or you grasp at the story, then you'll tumble off, and who knows when you'll get back to the task at hand, which is the yoga.
And that kind of leads to this idea that we were talking about this earlier, that there's certain texts and that talk about how we become sort of more equanimous, or a little bit more equanimity in the way we approach things, where things you don't. One of the things that happens for the highly practiced yogi is that, or yogini, is that these contrasting things like hot and cold are not something you are distressed by, or that you gravitate to or hold on to. And this idea of you become disinterested in things that pull you out of the state of being more attentive and aware to what's going on in the moment.
Yeah. So there's the question originally was, yoga makes you more sensitive, but you could flip that around and say, well, yoga seems to make you much less sensitive because you're not as upset by heat or cold or happiness and sadness or all of these different variations, but you can walk around and just kind of see things as. And so many times yoginis have been accused of being insensitive as much as they've been accused of being sensitive. But it's really a flip in the meaning of the word.
Yeah.
And
although people can hear, when you're an accomplished yogi, you're not disturbed by these, opposite types of things, and then that becomes something that you want to make happen, to prove to yourself or to maybe others that you are this accomplished yogi, and it starts to become kind of a way of spiritually bypassing what's going on within your experience.
Right, because you become terribly attached to becoming non-attached, and you have a picture of that, and so there, and traditionally throughout India and Asia, there are monks and yoginis and people who live that way, and they really try to separate themselves from normal society, and oftentimes they've had to go through whatever, you know, saying goodbye to family and friends and their high school reunions and things, and and they go off to the forest, and they live much of the way that many yogis for thousands of years have lived, where they just live off separately, and living alone in the forest or in a temple or like a commune, they can focus and practice in their own small community or
Get really sensitive.
and get really sensitive. But then when they go into town, just the slightest thing can upset. A dog will bark at them, or they'll hear a traffic horn, or what happens in the modern world,
We're not the right ones to ask.
But and then they become completely like, oh my God, this is terrible, and they have to run back off to the mountains, back off to their solitude, and find a certain disgust in ordinary life, where people have to deal, like farmers have to deal with, the climate. They have to deal with water and insects and all of these things. Then it's just difficult.
Yeah.
And
so I guess, as we practice and as we become more sensitive, which will happen, what gradually starts to happen is this sense of interconnectedness just penetrates the awareness that you see and feel and experience. This, interconnectedness where you start to be slightly less important, which is a really relief for many of us. And you also start to see that part of how the nature of the world is impermanence. And so you see interconnectedness, you experience it, and you also experience impermanence in the realm of everything changing, from the physical sensations within your body to the mental formations, etc. And you start to really get how interconnectedness and impermanence are such sort of complementary aspects of the nature of what this is all about.
Yeah.
And that without impermanence, we couldn't really go deeply into the gift of being more sensitive.
Right, or the beauty of, because what makes one awestruck is to perceive the changing, the continuous transformation or changing of your immediate experience, and then of everything, and so you can see the change in the environment. You can see the change in, on a microscopic level, on the macroscopic. You see it out in the, if you get a good telescope, you can see all of these things. And it's fascinating enough that you forget about your own little story that you're obsessed with the rest of the day. And so the whole art of yoga is then sharing that, either as a student or a teacher. It doesn't really, at that point, who cares? Just to be able to share that with others is inspiring, and so it's more like this kind of deeper joy, rather than like, oh, I just had a positive thought, a negative thought. It's hot, it's cold, I'm happy, sad, but I'm like, wow, there's this beauty,
Yeah.
this depth. which is impermanence. And then as you practice, there's something about impermanence that makes you go, oh, wait a minute. And which reminds me of something. There's, I was thinking of the Katha Upanishad.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah. And probably a few of you have read this before. I could do the Kena
No,
Upanishad.
the
too.
kata is the one we were talking
Yeah,
about.
the Katha Upanishad. There's this, and this is something you should research yourself, and you should research about at least 5 or 6 different translations, because some of them are not very good. But there's this young boy named Nachiketas, and his father is a very sincere, hardworking farmer Brahmin, because a lot of Brahmins are also farmers because they have to live in the real world. And he was getting old, and he was doing, a giving of gifts or of sacrifice, and his son Nachiketas was probably 11 or 12, just on the edge of being a preteen, just at the edge where he could be mildly, what would the term be? Wonderful, and slightly irritating. And this seems to be a universal phase that children go through.
Sometimes
For a
we
long
never
time.
grow out of it.
Some of us are still in it. And so his father gave away a few cows and this is not the cows were not killed or sacrificed in that way, but they were given as gifts donations to the community, and then Nachiketas was just thinking about this, and then he was thinking, well, what's the good of giving these old cows away? And he was saying they don't produce milk anymore, and they're
about
just
to die.
yeah, they're probably going to die pretty soon. And so he kept asking his father, Father, who are you going to give me to? And his father, you're going to offer me in sacrifice. And he kept asking his father, and his father basically ignored him until he asked the third time, and his father became angry. And he said, I'm going to give you to death and to Yama. And his father also intuitively knowing that that's where all of us are ending up. But he was quite angry. And the little boy said, oh, okay, that's exciting. And the father was still quite angry at him. And the little boy said, this is kind of exciting and amongst his community of young students, imagine, he
Sixth
said,
grade.
yeah, it would be the 6th grade. He said, I'm going to be the first one, out of all my pals and friends to do this. And he was quite excited. And then he sat and he thought about it a little more, and he said, no, actually, I'm going to be the middle amongst many. So he immediately had this immediate thinking that many, many have been sent to death, to meet death, Yama, before. And so he's looking at history, and he's looking at impermanence. And we can also think of, I think, I'm going to probably live,
Hopefully another 30 minutes.
another 30 minutes or another 30 years, I'm watching the clock here. And then I think, well, boy, if I go soon, amongst the people I know, I can maybe text them about what the experience is like or something, and I'll be the first. And then you start thinking, wow, all of these people, ancestors, and you start really thinking historically about the billions and billions. And then that's just in terms of the human populations of all of the other living creatures. And it's like, oh, wow. And so Nachiketas then decides, okay, I'm going to go off. And in this particular myth, Yama is the Lord of Death, and Yama is actually a very compassionate, super intelligent, someone who serves all beings.
He's not the Grim Reaper.
He's not the Grim Reaper. He's actually the smiling, compassionate, super intelligent Reaper. And so Nachiketas goes to where Yama lives, and he goes up to Yama's house. But Yama is out on a mission, so he wasn't home. And Nachiketas is a young Brahmin boy who's very kind of innocent and mildly obnoxious, but intelligent. And he has to sit on Yama's front porch of his house for 3 days before Yama comes back. And it's like, who knows what Yama was doing? He was out giving the teachings of impermanence, firsthand experience to many others. And Yama comes back and he sees there's this quite bright-looking young boy on his porch, and he goes, "Oh, what a sweet young boy. I apologize to you so much that I kept you waiting. I will grant you, for each of the nights you had to wait, a wish." And so Nachiketas is given 3 wishes, and he says, and Nachiketas had been sitting there thinking about the situation
for 3 days.
For 3 days, and so he was basically practicing. And he said, the first thing is, I would like to basically contact and make sure that my father isn't super pissed at me because his father was angry enough to curse him to meet Yama. And so Yama arranged that his father, when he finally meets him again, will be extremely pleased to see him and completely happy.
And so he was had become sensitive to relationship.
He had become sensitive. Yeah, those primary relationships. Mm-hmm. And so that was very advanced. And then he wanted to, because his father had engaged in giving gifts or in what is called sacrifice or yajna, he wanted to learn from Yama, the god of death, the art of yajna, the art of sacrifice. And so this is a very mysterious level of the teaching. And so Yama says, okay, I'll teach you. And in 3 verses, he teaches him how to arrange the bricks correctly in making a pit for a fire sacrifice, and all of the different mantras and all of the different things, rituals. And he says that this is the entire wisdom of the sacrifice as lives in the heart of all beings. And this is hidden deep in the heart of other beings, and most don't know it. And, and I mean, really, why is this happening? But then and this art of sacrifice is really the art of setting an intention, as one might do before their yoga practice, and then arranging the different things around you carefully so that you can actually focus your mind on that which you've chosen to focus the mind on.
And it takes it takes the quality of, sincerity, of the sincere gesture to
I'm going
to really
make a gift or a sacrifice. And sacrifice, you're giving something of value, not some old cows, unless that's all you got, like his father.
And so that's why the sincerity would be okay in that case.
And eventually, as a bodhisattva, you say, well, I'm going to sacrifice, all of my ego function, all of the endless numbers of lifetimes that are created by the different layers of mind. I'm going to give them as a gift to all other beings. And so that is also sacrifice. And so he teaches him the art of sacrifice. And this is really the art, and not merely the imposition, but the art of religion, which humans do. So even if you're not not a theist or something in a particular way, you still have the art of how to focus your mind and how to, of those things that, you have felt are super important. Perhaps it's, you can choose your own thing.
But I guess it's like the heartfelt sense of connection.
Yeah.
That's the unspoken, and that's the real depth of connecting from the heart.
Yeah. And this essentially is the actual mechanics of how practice works. And of course, when you have practice, and that allows you then to go back to your mindfulness practice or to stay with the sensations of the samskaras. And so you wander off less and less, or if you do wander off, which you notice it eventually, perhaps, 10 minutes later or 10 seconds later or 6 years later, you tend to notice that. And so it's an art form, and many of the yoga practices are metaphorically, you're taking and you're offering that which is the best you have, which is, and you're offering the nectar of your own compassion, whatever intelligence you have, whatever, what else do people offer? Compassion, intelligence, kindness.
Yeah, kindness.
Insight. Oh, yeah, if you actually have, and you're offering that into forgiveness, into the various sensation patterns, the feelings of the breath, the feelings of the sensation pattern, and the memories and the storylines that they invoke. So if what is arising is some neurotic memory about your traumatic childhood, or your amazement at the political stupidity that has captivated humanity for the last 30, 40,000 years. Those are also, you're making an offering into that. And that is actually the art of practice. And so Nachiketas was said, thank you very much. And then Yama said to him, then he said, and for my third wish, I want to know what happens at the time of death. And Yama goes, and Yama secretly smiles, but he doesn't let the young boy know that. He says, that is a very difficult thing to understand. And most practitioners, they can't understand this. And it's one of the deepest mysteries of life. Please, I'll give you some other gift rather than this understanding of impermanence, of death. Choose anything you want. And you can choose, a long life, and you can choose a lot of wealth, and, success. You can be a successful sacrificer, and you can be famous, and you can have enough wealth to donate to others. And Nachiketa says, having met you, that doesn't sound very good. And then Death says, well, if that doesn't interest you, how about if I offer you your own kingdom? And then when you're royalty, then you can do all of these great works for people. And you can have even your own, uh, you know, your own YouTube channel. Or, and Nachiketa says, having met you, that is of no interest to me. And then Yama says, the third thing is, how about if I offer you dominion, I give you endless life, and you can have angels singing your name, and you can have apsaras, and you can have worlds and worlds of people adoring you. And it's what every, cult leader would want. You can have rivers and rivers of adoring fans. And Nachiketas looks at him and he says, having met you, that is completely of no interest to me, because all of that is completely impermanent. And Yama says, and he says, thank you. And Yama was the teacher, was extremely excited and pleased that he actually had a student who was going to listen.
And who really could hear about death, impermanence, suffering, and non-suffering, etc., and be able to do something and live in a way that exemplified insight into that. So, and it's because of really truly, when we thought about that story earlier, and part of it is that so many of us, we become more sensitive, and then things like death and the suffering of others, or our own suffering, can become overwhelming, or can raise fear and can raise confusion. And so the question is, number one, why was Nachiketas able to not have these responses, this fear and this sort of aversion to impermanence? And then also, as a yoga practitioner, as we start learning about them, how is it that our sensitivity, because he was a very sensitive kid, sitting out there on the porch, and the first thing thinking of, I want to make amends with my
father and my family.
Father and my family. So he was very moved, emotionally heartfult, etc.
And in his immediate, what would if he got out of Yama, he was able to return home.
And so, when we look
on the small, so he was sensitive to interfacing, on the local level. Just, in his own, it's just like in your own immediate environment. So let's say today I don't have the opportunity to influence world politics except on the very tiny local level. And if an opportunity arises, we'll take it. But for right now, I've got to interface with, the
mailman.
The mailman, the garden. And so you do that.
And in fact, when you become very tuned in, and in a sense, sensitivity is just that you're very awake in the moment, that those little things like working within your own garden, they have the same importance as doing something on a global level, because you're doing them with attentiveness and care, and without the need for some sort of reward or some sort of kudos that you've done this, but you're doing it because it is what needs to be done. And when you think about the way in our culture, much of the Western world and other parts of the world too, deals with things like impermanence and the suffering that comes up because of it, there is this aversion that starts to drive our actions and our interactions with suffering. And so the question that the student came up with, which was, as a yoga teacher, you offer these teachings to students, they become more sensitive, and then you turn them out into this world filled with suffering, and are you doing them harm? And really, truly, the answer is that as a teacher, and we'll talk about this in a second, but that as a practitioner, when you become more and more sensitive, there is this opportunity to really take the responsibility for your interfacing within the world. And so when you run into suffering or you interface with suffering, rather than shying away from it or trying to immediately quell it or fix it, what you do is what you do with everything else, where you go, oh,
Look again.
let me look again at this. Yeah. And you turn towards it rather than turn away from it or hide it or cover it up. And that doesn't mean that you then, become an ambulance chaser and that you're out there looking for panic and suffering, but that when you are feeling grounded and whole, that you're able to turn towards suffering and sort of embrace it as you would embrace your own awareness of your body within your yoga practice, as you notice, that pain in the hip, there it is again. Maybe there's something to that. Let me look again. And
it doesn't mean you encourage it.
No, or that you identify with it.
Or that you identify with it, or that you're trying to milk it for a number of yoga points.
Yeah.
But you hold it.
Yeah, you give it attentiveness. And
just look mindfully at it.
And by tuning into yourself as you do that and tuning into the suffering that you're experiencing, there is exactly what this story is about, which is this idea of the heartfelt sense of engagement. In this story, in terms of sacrifice, it's this heartfelt honesty that you share in whatever form it is. You do that with the situations of suffering. And sometimes there's nothing you can no action you can take to alleviate this suffering. And sometimes there is.
Sometimes there is.
But if you go in without the preconception that you must change something or do something, then you are ripe and ready, as Nachiketa's was, for whatever will best serve that situation to come to you. And you experiment and you work with it. And so the sensitivity that we get through yoga, or that as teachers, we will see developing in students, can be a wonderful thing if we, as students and as teachers, help one another to stay grounded and to stay out of our fantasy worlds of who we are and who others are, but to stay grounded in what's actually occurring in this moment. And so the responsibility for a teacher really is to be careful. We were talking earlier about, what it really means to work with students and to work with oneself is, the first thing you have to do is to keep practicing, to keep looking more deeply and listening more deeply to those you're engaging with and looking simultaneously at yourself. Like, am I projecting onto this one, or am I able to be more of a clean slate as I'm there, being with them, and then trusting the process of showing up. And so as a teacher, that's this, question. If you don't if you don't teach and people don't become more sensitive, then what will happen? If you do teach and people do become more sensitive, what then do you do to provide the support and the space in order to to give them, not you, give them the capacity to face the suffering that's there, to turn towards it and be with it.
So that's the practice. Is, and so oftentimes you don't know what to do, but there's on many levels you suggest someone slow down, that they pay attention, that they not strain, and these are all part of many of the the more evolved yoga traditions, and that you learn to practice, but then you learn to also let it go, and just go and just allow it to be infinite and mysterious, and then very quickly then another level of inquiry and feedback comes. And so it's very much like the practice of medicine, although not as much school involved. The same ethical challenges.
And so it involves a certain amount of trust in yourself and in the process of things unfolding.
It's trust in yourself. It's also trust in all the different traditions that have hooked into this. But it's also a skepticism about the various literal interpretations of, because you can have a wonderful tradition, and the ego can come along and completely try to milk the tradition for all the money or fame that you can get out of it. And so, but you see that pattern, and it doesn't then you start to say, oh, a tradition is actually deeper than my little current definition of it. It's something very deep. And it's just that you do the same thing with, things out in nature, with trees and plants and mountains and things. You look more deeply past your initial definition, and you start to see that these are actually fascinatingly beautiful.
Yeah. So I guess the answer would be to that question.
Keep practicing.
It is not a bad thing to teach yoga and watch as the students get more sensitive. And it is the teacher's responsibility to follow up, and the teacher's responsibility not to take advantage of or abuse that increased sensitivity, to manipulate because of it in any way. And so it is just this incredible gift, really, to have this heightened awareness in the form of heightened sensitivity. And that can really serve and outweigh the fact, in a sense, that the world is very troubled, and it allows...
This allows something to be done, to help.
Something to be done.
You can actually help.
So That's what we thought about it. We hope that
We're still working,
we're still working on
still
it.
thinking about it.
But maybe that's helped you a little bit with this. And please keep practicing, keep interfacing with others, keep laughing,
Keep breathing.
keep breathing.
Both.
Yeah. And thank you so much for joining.